right?
Researcher at the National Research Center. In the following, I will present you a working collaboration with Maria Castaldo and Tommaso concerning begins in 1991 when Linus Torvald introduced Linux, the first example of a fast-growing collaborative project. After Linux, the Semantic Web designed a suitable architecture for collaboration, and we assisted to the birth and development of Wikipedia, the largest human collaborative project, and of the social coding platform GitHub that nowadays we all massively use. In the last decade, this platform have shown an enormous potential for research, not only for studying collaboration patterns, but more in general, for analyzing human behavior. These collaborative experiences express a deep transformation of the knowledge production patterns. We shift from a hierarchically organized intelligence with a static division of labor where each actor has an assigned role, to the so-called collective intelligence, where the actors have no assigned roles and can randomly participate to the task they prefer. The expression wisdom of the crowds describes the maybe unexpected creative power generated by this type of self-organized interactions. This hidden wisdom emerges thanks to a sort of design serendipity promoted by the platforms. The diversity of the participants and their micro-expertise can timely intervene to unlock the creative process and generate cascades of major innovations. Starting from the success of these collaborative experiences, we can pose the question, can we imagine to do research in a large-scale, open, collaborative environment? This is the question analyzed in the book Reinventing Discovery by Michael Nielsen, and it is in the first attempt to answer this question are the Polymath projects. The first Polymath project was proposed in 2009 by the mathematician Tim Gowers with a post on his blog where he invited all the mathematicians to contribute to the solution of a problem in number theory, following a dedicated discussion on his blog. After this, other 15 Polymath projects followed, and the 6 of them arrived to a final peer-reviewed publication signed with the collective name Polymath Collaboration. Studying the Polymath project not only allows to study collaborative science, but it also constitutes an unprecedented playground to deeply analyze the discovery processes. We downloaded the post of the blogs, with a particular focus on the project that arrived to a publication. In the following, I will present you the results of our study, addressed to the participants' activity and the context they produced. We first analyzed the global properties of the Polymath ecosystem. In the table on the right, you can observe the basic demography of each project. The bipartite network on the left shows the contribution of each author to all the projects. We can observe a small connected core of authors that participated to all the projects and a large set of contributors just collaborating to a single project. As usually happens in collaborative systems, few participants do most of the work. We have indeed a power law distribution of the number of contributions by author. In the figure, we represented this under the form of the Lorentz curve. The authors are ranked according to their contribution, and the curve represents the cumulative fraction of contributions produced by a certain fraction of ranked authors. We can observe from the figure that the most active 10% produced the 80% of the posts. We used the Lorentz curve to hierarchically classify the groups of authors. We take the derivative of the Lorentz curve at the point 1, 1, and we set a first threshold at the point where the derivative crosses the x-axis, as you can see in the figure. The authors after this threshold represent the elite of the project. We remove the elite and we recursively repeat this procedure, identifying different activity levels and therefore different groups of authors. This plot represents the fraction of authors in each hierarchical group. The first group, the elite, contained less than the 10% of the authors. We will be back on this partition later. Secondly, we focused on the global productivity of the projects. Several studies on collaborative systems showed the superlinear effect of collaboration. Collective intelligence means that when more people are involved in the project, they produce more than what they produce working individually. For all the projects, we count the daily number of posts and the daily number of participants. Plotting this couple of numbers, mixing together all the project, we observed a marked superlinear growth with exponent 1.46 of the number of posts with the number of users. This confirmed the results obtained, for example, for GitHub. To analyze the content of the post, we reconstructed a vocabulary of mathematical jargon. To do this, we first took the Wikipedia pages classified as mathematics, and secondly, we added the expression like theorem of someone extracted from the texts. Using this vocabulary, each post can be identified as a set of mathematical keywords. We first test that the polymath projects follow the basic laws of linguistics. The Zipf law says that the frequency of a word is inversely correlated with its rank. The Ipps law shows a power law growth of the vocabulary size respect to the length of the text, namely the number of different words respect to the total number of words. We observe that not only these laws are respected by our corpora, but also all the projects show a universal behavior, displaying the same exponents for these laws. Using this description of the post as a set of keywords, we can calculate the proximity of the post using the Jacquard similarity. We can observe from the figure that the more two posts are next in time, the more they are similar in content, signifying a logical development of the reasoning. We can invert this empirical law to define a typical memory time tau zero that corresponds to the average value of the Jacquard. We use this typical time to define a distance measure between the posts that includes both the semantic distance and the temporal distance. Using this measure, this is the one described in the lower formula, two posts that are similar in content but far in time will be less similar among them than using the usual Jacquard measure. We use the semantic temporal similarity measure to define an innovation index for each post. First, we define for each post two separate indicators. The in-debate index tells us how a post is correlated with the recent contents. It is calculated as the average of the semantic temporal similarity from the previous posts. The impact index tells us how a post content is reproduced in the future. It is calculated as the Jacquard similarity with the following post. An innovative post will have a low in-debate index and a high impact. For this reason, we define innovation with the formula minus impact multiplied by the logarithm of the in-debate index. This figure shows the distribution of the innovation for all the projects that, as we can see, has a large, broad distribution. In the following, we will define innovative, the posts that are in the upper quartile of the innovation distribution. Going back to the definition of the activity shells that we defined at the beginning, we would like now to know which are the actors that are the major responsible for the production of innovation. Since the sites of the group are different, we compare the number of innovation observed in the class with its multinomial expectation, namely the probability of a post to be innovative multiplied by the number of posts produced by the group. We calculate the zeta score between the observed and the expected value, and this is what is represented in the figure. While the previous results showed a quite homogeneous behavior of the projects, here we can observe marked differences. For the project 1, 4, and 8, the elite produce more innovation than expected. On the contrary, for the project 5 and 15, intermediary or low shells are important producer of innovation for the projects. In this presentation, I show you some statistical results on and from the polymath ecosystem. I would like to point out that it is still a work in progress, and a lot of work is still to be done, both for the interpretation of the results and for producing other information. So your comment and suggestion will be extremely important for the follow-up of our study. Thank you a lot for the attention.
Thank you, Floriana. Thank you for keeping up time in the presentation. I think we can afford 2 minutes of questions and comments. So please come through if you have anything that you'd like to share with Floriana, any feedback, any question. You can just unmute yourself directly if you want to, or just leave something in the chat. No? I'm sure there will be other moments to interact about this subject. So thank you very much to the speaker. And Tomomi, Kito, you'll now have the stage. So we're going to presentation.
Can you allow me to share the screen, please?
You should have those functionalities.
Hold on. The one, sorry about that.
Because the person that was supposed is yeah,
now I can.
Tomomi, yeah, you should do it now.
Let me try again.
Okay.
The characteristics of the inter-organisational adversarial network in strategic.
No?
That's good. Just increase the volume a bit. We could hear you.
Are you not hearing?
Yes, yeah. We were. You just need to increase the volume a bit, maybe.
Sorry.
So we could hear you.
Could you hear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Then let me try again now.
Hi everyone, my name is Tomomi Kito. This talk is about investigating the characteristics of the inter-organisational adversarial network in strategic patenting. As most of you would agree, patent data is a great source of information that provides rich insight into innovation. To date, patent citation networks have been intensively studied, where the fundamental idea is that the citation network structure reflects the organization of human technology. In these studies, the number of patent citations is considered as a good indicator of the value of invention. There are also many patent studies about collaborative knowledge creation. They investigate how the diversity of collaborating companies in terms of the size, field of expertise, geographical location, and so on may impact on the performance. Then often the performance of a team of the companies is measured by the number of patents. However, both of these strands of research are not really paying attention to the very fundamental fact that the patenting is actually a strategic action of a company to exclude others from making, using, or selling an invention. Therefore, intercompany relationships in patenting should really be considered as being adversarial. Of course, collaborations can happen too, but not because they are friends. Actually, that happens because they think strategically that collaboration would benefit them. This aspect has been largely neglected in patent data science. So in this study, we shed light on patent opposition. It's a legal action that a company can take within 6 to 9 months after a patent is granted, to claim that the other's patent is not innovative and thus should be revoked. So when the patent opposition is successful, then that the patent is revoked. Companies make oppositions to hinder others' success with a clear intention, or sometimes just to declare that they are investing in that area too. Therefore, opposition is really directly capturing intercompany adversarial rivalry relationship. So our motivation in this study is as follows. First, as a patent and innovation study, we would like to check if patent oppositions really reflect companies' IP strategies. Then, as a network study, we are interested in how the formation of adversarial rivalry relationships may be different from positive, like friendly, or negative, disliking relationships. Also, whether we can explain local relational patterns among companies using social network theories like the structure balance theory, that is, an enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so on. So we are going to investigate these points by using patent opposition data. The data source we used is a patent database called Orbis Intellectual Property provided by one of the largest business information publisher, Bureau van Dijk. We also used a database called Orbis, which contains company information linked with the intellectual property database via company IDs. We extracted all the opposed patents between 1980 and 2018 and then identified companies who made the oppositions as well as those who own the opposed patents. Then we created a network of companies instead of that of patents. These figures illustrate how we created the network, which is very simple. If company A opposed a patent owned by B, then we created a directed opposition edge from A to B. If an opposed patent is jointly owned by B and C, like this, then we created opposition edges from A to B and A to C, as well as a collaboration edge, which is undirected between B and C. So this way we identified over 11,000 companies involved in at least one opposition and over 26,000 opposition edges and 1,500 collaboration edges. Actually, in the patent data, there are many tricky situations happening. I'm not going to explain all here, but one example is patent transfer. If a patent jointly owned by B and C, like this, and was later B transferred its patent right to D, maybe because B was acquired by D or just sold this division or something to D, then we simply removed the collaboration edge between B and C when the transfer happened, then create another collaboration edge between C and D. And this edge lasts until the expiry date of this patent. So these are the rules of creating patent opposition. Now let me show you the opposition network in a cumulative manner. As you can see, the network was first fragmented but over time became more and more connected. Then eventually there is one large connected component comprising about 7,500 companies. There are many companies in Europe, which is mainly due to their legal system that encourage companies to do oppositions. This graph shows the degree distribution of the network, indicating there are a small number of companies holding a large number of edges. This is pretty different from social negative networks. If people are disliking each other, for example, the network wouldn't be so connected. We found that companies are so connected because there are so many inter-country edges. If we remove edges formed between companies locating in different countries, the largest connected component size becomes much smaller. We also found that companies who get opposed many times have patents in many industries. There are 8 industry sectors defined in the patent data by the IPC classification. We used that data. Also, when companies oppose others, they seem to oppose patents not only in one specific industry but in multiple industries. Then, what kind of patents do companies oppose? Here, I'm showing the distribution of the technological proximity of company pairs that are connected by opposition edges. Technological proximity is a well-established measure to calculate how similar patent portfolios of two companies are. It's just a cosine similarity between the patent vectors. Then, as this figure shows, oppositions do occur mostly between companies who have similar IP strategies, so technological proximity close to 1. Therefore, it's reasonable to say that oppositions are reflecting intercompany rivalry relationships. Then, this graph shows the distributions of the number of citations that a patent gained. So the x-axis shows the number of subsequent patents that cite this patent. Then y-axis is number of patents. As you can see, patents which never got opposed, these blue dots, do not get many citations, whereas patents that got opposed at least once attract more citations. This is a clear sign that opposed patents have a higher value, since the number of citations has been proven as a good simple indicator of patent value. Now let me move on to the analysis of local structural patterns. We conducted motif analysis, of which the results are shown here. We identified a few triadic patterns overrepresented in the network. There are also closed triangles like this and this, identified as statistically significant motifs. We then conducted temporal motif analysis too. For example, this pattern 4 can be formed many different ways, like this, if we take into account the occurrence order of edges. The row counts are shown here. As you see, these patterns occurred more frequently than others, which are that companies who have a rival in common become adversarial. This result is basically suggesting that although the structural balance theory says that the enemy of my enemy is likely to become my friend, in the case of the opposition network, that is not true. Rather, the enemy of my enemy is also my enemy. This differentiates the adversarial network from other types of negative networks. Then we wondered where collaborations occur then in this network. So we started with this most frequently observed open triad, shown here, and added a collaboration edge here instead of an opposition edge, and created this opposition collaboration mixed triad. This triad can happen in two ways, like this. Then we counted the occurrence of each of these cases. Likewise, based on the second and third most frequently observed open triads, we created these closed opposition collaboration mixed triads and counted the frequency by taking into account the order of occurrence of two oppositions and one collaboration. As you see, basically collaboration and opposition mix doesn't occur that much, but it's more likely that collaboration triggers opposition rather than the other way around. One interesting finding here is that when two companies who are collaborating got opposed by the same company, they have a higher chance of collaborating again later. This pattern happened to about 60% of company pairs who have multiple collaboration edges between them. Therefore, being opposed by the same company, which is a sign of technological closeness, can be also a sign of that their collaboration is valuable. Okay, conclusions. We found that patent oppositions occur when companies are rivals and the patent has high value. Companies oppose rivals' patents even when their rivals are somewhere abroad, meaning that their patents are registered in a different jurisdiction. We think that adversarial rivalry relationships form a network which exhibits different characteristics from those of positive or negative relationships. At least the results I shared with you are signaling that possibility, so we will further investigate this point in future. These results are published in an open access journal here, so if you are interested, please check it out. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your talk. We might have a couple of minutes for questions or comments or...
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, if I can. So one is, do you see different patterns if for oppositions who are successful or not?
Yeah, but yeah, we checked, but actually the cases of success is a very small number.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't really see any statistical significance there.
And did you also run an analysis of what these patterns relate to M&A trajectories?
Yeah, that's what we are checking right now. And as I explained a little bit, there are so many patent transfer actions going on there, and that's mostly triggered by M&A. And then basically M&A happens when they, of course, there's buyers find the value in these small companies usually. So it is really correlated there.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sure there'll be more interactions maybe in the breaks about the talks. If you'd agree, I would ask Balazs to go. I don't know if I pronounce your name properly, I'm sorry, but he'll be talking about the role of geography in conflict diffusion of innovations. So go ahead when ready.
Yep. Can you see that now? Can you hear me?
All good.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm doing this live. I think I'm better at it. So in this paper, we are interested in whether geography has any role in how innovation diffuses in social networks. And the rationale behind it is that, behind this question is that we understand quite many things on how innovation diffuses in social networks. So according to the central tenet, a user is more likely to adopt an innovation than his or her friends have already adopted before. What is still an open question is geography. So what we don't understand is whether, so if you imagine that these two hairbals are two towns, if we don't understand whether the size of the towns matter for innovation diffusion, or the distance between these two towns matter for diffusion, or the social network structure in these towns matter for diffusion. So these are not very new questions. You see in geography that these questions have been analyzed from the 50s already. And there are two stylized facts that apply to many innovations. First of all, geographical proximity matters for diffusion. In this case of the hybrid corn, you see that the adoption curve of the corn seed was much faster in Iowa, the origin of this type of innovation, and then the adoption curve followed Iowa in states that are further and further away from Iowa. So proximity matters. Another stylized fact is that the size of cities matter as well. So for example, innovations tend to originate in big cities from where they tend to diffuse to medium-sized cities, and these medium-sized cities mediate the innovation to small towns and then finally to small villages. So there is this ground truth, so to say, in geography that space matters in two aspects. Now we have the lucky situation that we have an online social network, and we can kind of follow how it diffused across space in Hungary. So this was a well adopted online innovation that was launched before Facebook, and we get nice data on where the individuals are located, when they adopted the website, so when they registered to the website. We see their friendship structure, so the social network, and we also see who sent the invitation to a new user to register on the website. In this video, you can see the adoption trends in Hungarian towns, and then you saw that in the beginning, invitations were sent from the capital, and then something happened, and then invitations were sent in a much more random way. However, when Facebook was already there after 2010, you see that this website got to be abandoned more and more. Users left this website, and you see now that basically no one was interested in interacting with friends on the website anymore. So we analyze this data and we make these 3-4 contributions to the literature. We explore the role of town size and geographical distance by fitting urban scaling law and gravity law to local adoption trends over the life cycle. And then we develop a agent-based model in which we parameterize individual adoption thresholds. I will talk about this later. And then we investigate how this ABM fits the empirical urban scaling and gravity laws. And then finally, we also investigate how the social network structures hinder or kind of are confounders for our ABM to predict local adoption peaks. Okay, so about the size effect of cities. So we fit the urban scaling law. So we divide the product lifecycle into 3 categories: early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And we see that if we fit this urban scaling line to the log population and the number of adopters plot, then the exponent of this fitted line is much bigger than 1 in the early stages and converges to 1 at later stages of the life cycle, which tells us that adoption is very much concentrated in big cities in the early phases of the life cycle, and then this concentration is decreasing over the product life cycle. Talking about the role of distance, we can fit the distance decay fit to the probability that an innovation is sent between 2 random users at distance d, and we see a growing importance of distance. So in the beginning, this probability is decreasing very smoothly as distance grows, but then the decay intensifies over time. So we can claim that in the beginning, the diffusion is not much concentrated in geographical space, but then diffusion becomes more and more local. All right, then we talk about whether we can estimate the time of adoption peak in towns. So for that, we apply this Balazs diffusion model, the basic diffusion model, which has 2 parameters, the innovation parameter P and the imitation parameter Q, and fitting a nonlinear regression on the adoption trends, we can calculate the time when the peak is estimated in this adoption curve. We can repeat this exercise for every towns we have in the sample, and then we can calculate this prediction error, which is the difference between the estimated peak of this regression and the empirically observed. And although there is a very nice correlation between estimated and empirical peaks in our data, we find a systematic error such that the Balazs diffusion model tends to predict adoption early in towns that are distant from the capital and tend to predict adoption late in towns that are big. Next, we develop a agent-based diffusion model that enables us to study how the innovation diffuses in social networks across geographical space. And for that, we use the same model setting in which we have parameter P, which is a exogenous innovation parameter, and the parameter Q, which is imitation, and this drives adoption in the social network. And this is influenced by the network effect, in which we control for the fraction of those neighbors who have adopted before our user that we are focusing on. So an important extension to this model is parameter T, which we use for parameterizing individual adoption thresholds. So one very nice feature of our data is that we can actually measure the adoption thresholds from the data itself. And we find this U-shaped curve, meaning that most users tend to adopt the innovation when half of their friends have adopted before. And the probability that they adopt when none of their friends have adopted before, or most of their friends have adopted before, is smaller. So we introduced this T parameter, and with this, we can increase the probability of adoption at medium levels of adoption thresholds and decrease this probability at low and high values of adoption thresholds. So we have two agent-based models, and we can compare. So first of all, we find that these both of these agent-based models kind of capture the adoption trends. Okay. Furthermore, there is this strange jump in adoption, which is very difficult to model, but our ABMs are better than the original BAS framework in this sense, because both of the ABMs are slower. All right. So then let's come to the results. Now we illustrate how the ABM in which the individual thresholds are incorporated fit to the empirically observed scaling laws. And we find that although there is very nice fit in the early adopter and majority and laggards phase, and still there is an okay fit in the innovators phase, we tend to underestimate the adoption in small towns compared to the data. However, we also find that when we incorporate individual thresholds, as I explained, our model becomes better in capturing the urban scaling law of innovation adoption. Next, we try to understand how are we doing better in capturing this distance decay that we observe empirically. And unfortunately, we are not. So even though we see empirically that distance decay intensifies over time, our agent-based model cannot capture this. It rather suggests a stable distance decay over time. Finally, we test whether the ABM in which we don't control for individual thresholds. So how can we improve the agent-based model when controlling for individual thresholds, and how do we get by curing some of the biases that local social networks might have on adoption trends. And we find that if we introduce these individual thresholds, we can cure the systemic biases that the dense and transitive social networks might have on individual on adoption trends. However, we are not able to remedy the biases that are caused by modular and network structures and networks that have long paths. Finally, we are also not able to cure the biases that we have observed before, such that these diffusion models predict adoption late in big towns and predict adoption early in towns that are distant from the original location. All right, I think I skipped this slide, and let me jump to the final one. So the paper is already out in Scientific Reports, and if you have any questions or comments, I would be very happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure there will be many people thinking about the presentation. Does anyone want to come to the front with a question or a comment? Just unmute yourself or place the question in the chat. We have 2 minutes that we could afford. Anyone? I guess sometimes we feel that the time that we have to pose the question is so short that we get inhibited to do it because we know that there won't be enough time to address the question. So then I'll propose that we carry our thoughts into the gather and maybe find opportunities to talk to our speakers. And I will give the stage to our final speaker. Yes, Konstantinos, who's going to talk about are triangular scientific collaborations preferable or not? Let's hear about it.
Let me share my screen.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Konstantinos Angelou from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and I will present my study that examines the type of scientific collaborations. Here you see the outline of the presentation. At first, I will state the purpose of the current study. Then I will present you the data that have been used for the analysis. Next, I will explain the methodology that we followed. And finally, you will see the results and the conclusions of the research. The purpose of the current study is to uncover the temporal variations in the formation patterns of triangles in a research and innovation network, to find out the type of collaborations, namely whether there is any preference in the formation of isolated or extended collaborations, and to identify the geographic NUTS2 regions that have persistently high clustering coefficient. The network that we study is a multiplex one, consisting of 2 layers. The first layer is that of patents registered in the European Patent Office, while the second layer contains the projects of Framework Programs 5 to 7 and Horizon 2020. The data range from 2002 to 2020, although FP5 initiated in 1998. That is because data prior to that year are quite sparse and could prove misleading. The nodes of the network are the NUTS2 geographic regions of the European territory, which are divisions of countries into smaller regions, used mainly for regional policies, with population between 800,000 and 3 million people. In total, there are 330 NUTS2 regions. A link between 2 regions exists when scientists from 2 different such regions collaborate for the invention of a patent or are partners in an FP project. We notice that the number of unique links in the patent layer is significantly less than the number of unique links in the FP layer, which is an indication that the 2 layers have differences in their connectivity. For our study, we use the sliding windows method to divide the network into smaller multiplex subnetworks. The division will be chronological and 28 windows will occur. More specifically, we consider the 1st of January and the 1st of July of each year from 2000 to 2013 as starting dates for the windows that last for 6 years until a plateau has been formed in the evolution of triangles. So we developed the network by inserting the links in both layers, and at the end of the 6-year period, we calculate the number of triangles for both layers. In addition, we calculate the number of triangles for the common layer, which has been formed by extracting the common links of the other two layers. We do this as we want to examine the common growth of the two networks. We also calculate the clustering coefficient, which contains the notion of triangles, and we compare the two results. Next, in order to identify the existence of any underlying mechanism that is responsible for any observations that occur, we create shuffled versions of the networks with the exact same properties, and we repeat the same procedure. For the results comparison of the real data and their shuffled versions, we use the z-score or standard score, which calculates the number of standard deviations that the real data differ from the average shuffled data. A z-score value close to 0 indicates that the shuffled versions of the network do not show any preferential attachment during their creation process, while absolute values over 3 indicate a non-random behavior. Here we see the number of triangles at the end of the 28 windows for the patent, the FP, and the common layer. Black dots represent the real data, while orange squares represent the average of the shuffled data. A first observation is that the number of triangles of the patent layer is negligible compared to the number of triangles of the other layers. This is due to the very high number of triangles links in the FP layer, which means that practically any inter-regional collaboration link in the patent layer will very likely have corresponding link in the FP layer. As a result, almost all patent links are transformed into common ones. Next, we see that for the patent and the common layer, the collaborations tend to be more isolated compared to their shuffled versions, which form more triangles for the entire period examined, which are many times more than the real data. Contrary to the patent and the common layer, FP, the triangles in the FP layer FPs tend to form an increased number of triangles when compared to their shuffled versions, which is a somewhat expected result since due to the nature of the FP collaborations. Concerning the comparison of the real data with the shuffled ones using the z-score, it is obvious that the results are not random, since they range more than 3 standard deviations, indicating that there is an inherent preference in networks formation process. Next, we use the clustering coefficient metric in order to qualitatively compare the results, since clustering coefficient contains the notion of triangles. Like triangles, the patent and the common real data have a significantly smaller average clustering coefficient comparing to their shuffled versions, which indicates their likeliness not to form triangles. On the other hand, the real data of the FP have a greater tendency of forming triangles than the shuffled ones. Concerning the z-score, it is clearly so again that for all the three layers, the results cannot be derived by a randomized process, and that an underlying preferential type of mechanism is responsible for their growth. So we conclude that the two metrics produce similar results, with their main quantitative difference, being that the triangle metric emphasizes the absence of a random process. Finally, here are the European maps, one for each layer, where the NUTS2 regions are presented. Their color has occurred by the average clustering coefficient that each region has for the 28 windows. What we observe is that geographic regions with high research activity, such as Paris, Madrid, and Rome, are not among the regions with the highest clustering coefficient for the FP and the common layer. On the contrary, there are regions in FP whose clustering coefficient is much higher than expected, since the number of collaborations is relatively small when compared to other regions. This is because active regions may have many more collaborations, which doesn't necessarily mean that they form many triangles. So their local clustering coefficient, remains small. For example, Paris has 324 links, the most that a node has in the current network. However, its clustering coefficient is relatively small. The same maps were also created for the average number of triangles for the 28 windows, where the role of major urbanized city centers is emphasized. To conclude, we studied the evolution of triangular collaborations on a multiplex research and innovation network. We found that there is a preference in the FP layer for the formation of more triangles over the shuffle data, while on patents in the common layer, the collaborations tend to be more isolated. Clustering coefficient results show a quite similar behavior, with their only quantitative difference being that the triangle metric emphasizes the absence of a random process. Finally, the NUTS2 regions have been ranked according to their average local clustering coefficient, where there are regions of high scientific activity with low clustering coefficient, and other regions that are not so scientifically active, which have a higher local clustering coefficient value. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We'll open a very short space for questions or comments. And I'd say maybe not just about this talk, but if anyone wants to share some more cross or meta type of talk connecting the different presentations, feel free just to unmute yourself. I know that we started a bit late. The room was open almost 10 minutes late, so you probably will want to go into the gather and continue chatting outside of the session. So if no one has comments or questions, that is the invitation, that you just take your ideas and carry them into our breaks and continue the conversation there. I don't know if anyone of the speakers wants to pose any question to each other. Well, then let's talk over a break. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the speakers. Thank you for all the participants. We'll keep seeing each other. There's still some hours left of this conference. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.